dive in.
Let's do it.
Today we're tackling Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
A very subtle art indeed.
Right. We'll be really trying to get at what he means by living a better life his way.
Which is definitely not your typical self-help advice.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you gave us a lot to unpack here, so should we just jump right in?
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, so Manson kicks things off with this really interesting quote, "Don't try." It's on Charles Bukowski's tombstone.
Bukowski, yeah.
And now, for anyone who might not know, he was a writer, pretty successful, but, well, he called himself a loser.
Oh, he was notorious for that kind of self-deprecation.
Yeah, an alcoholic, womanizer, you name it, he owned it. So how does a guy like that, with all that baggage, find success?
That's the thing about Bukowski. He wasn't afraid to be brutally honest about his flaws, his struggles.
No, you really put it all out there.
And people connected with that rawness. It was refreshing.
Yeah.
You know, this kind of unapologetic authenticity.
Yeah.
And that, I think, gets to the heart of Manson's message.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's saying that accepting, maybe even embracing the fact that life is inherently, well, kind of messed up, can be incredibly freeing.
Okay, so instead of fighting the chaos, we should just, lean into it?
In a way, yeah. It's a radical idea, especially in a world that's constantly telling us we need to strive for more, be more.
Yeah, it's all about never enough. Bigger house, better car, more followers, the list goes on.
And social media just amplifies all that, right? It creates this constant pressure, this feeling of inadequacy.
Yeah, it's like we're all bombarded with these perfectly curated lives, and we start to feel like we're not measuring up.
Exactly. And that's where Manson introduces this concept he calls the feedback loop from hell.
Okay, the feedback loop from hell. That sounds, pretty terrible. What's that all about?
Well, think about how you feel when you're scrolling through social media, seeing everyone's highlight reels.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's, not good for the self-esteem.
Right. It's easy to fall into the trap of comparing ourselves and feeling like we come up short. That's the first part of the loop.
Okay, so we feel bad because everyone else seems to be doing amazing.
Right. And then we judge ourselves for feeling bad. We get stuck in this cycle of, I shouldn't feel this way. Why am I not as happy or successful as everyone else?
Oh, man, it is a vicious cycle, isn't it?
It really is. And that's what Manson wants us to break free from. He's saying that this constant comparison, this chasing after more, is what's actually making us miserable.
So if chasing more just leads to this feedback loop from hell, what's the alternative? Does that mean we should just stop caring about anything? Just become totally apathetic?
No, not at all. It's not about apathy. It's about being intentional.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we become more intentional with, I guess, where we direct our energy?
That's where Manson gets really interesting. He says we need to focus on having good problems.
Good problems. Now, that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Like, don't we have enough problems already?
Exactly. But I'm curious to hear what he means by that. Yeah, I mean, good problems. How does that even work?
Well, Manson, he explains it in a pretty funny way, actually. He introduces this idea of the disappointment panda.
Okay, the disappointment panda, I'm all ears. Hit me with this.
So picture this. A panda walks right up to you and just lays down all those hard truths you've been avoiding.
Oh, no thanks.
Right. But that's the thing. No sugarcoating, no motivational posters, just straight up reality checks.
Okay, I have to admit, the panda thing is kind of funny. I get it.
Right. He's using humor, but he's making a serious point. Because he's saying facing those uncomfortable truths, it's actually what moves us forward. It's those reality checks, not some, fake positivity that actually help us grow.
Okay, so the disappointment panda, it's like tough love kind of thing.
Exactly. And Manson, he compares avoiding pain, whether it's physical or emotional pain, he compares it to ignoring the check engine light in your car.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that.
You can keep driving for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up to you.
Right. So you're saying all those negative emotions like the disappointment, frustration,
yeah,
those are actually important.
They're signals, they're feedback telling us something needs to change.
Wow.
And then Manson takes this idea of good problems a step further. He's got this whole story, right? So he's at a bar.
Okay.
And this talking panda, same one, sidles up to him.
Of course, a talking panda.
And the panda says, don't hope for a life without problems. There's no such thing. Instead, hope for a life full of good problems.
A life full of good problems. All right, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What makes a problem good?
You got it. A good problem, at least according to Manson, is one that challenges us to grow. It's a problem that's aligned with our values. Something that actually helps us build the kind of life we want.
Okay, so It's not about avoiding challenges altogether. It's more about, like, picking the right challenges to deal with.
Exactly. And that's where our values come in. Remember we were talking about those right things to focus on?
Yeah.
Our values are like a compass. They point us toward those good problems. They're how we decide what's important to us.
So are you saying that if our values are messed up, we end up with, like, the wrong problems?
It's definitely possible. We might find ourselves struggling with things that don't actually matter to us in the grand scheme of things. Manson calls those bad values, things that are driven by like what other people think or this need for more, more, more.
Yeah, I've been there.
Those things, they might sound good on paper, but they can leave you feeling empty.
They really can.
And he uses these musicians as examples. Mark Manson, the writer, and then Dave Mustaine from Megadeth.
Okay.
Both successful musicians, right? But their values are totally different. Mustaine, he's got the fame, the money, but he's still comparing himself to his old band, Metallica. He's always chasing something just out of reach.
So he's stuck in that feedback loop from hell we talked about.
Exactly. It all comes back around. And it shows how important it is to choose values that really resonate with us, not just what society tells us to value.
So it's like you get to define what success looks like for you.
You got it. And it made me think about Pete Best, the guy who was almost a Beatle.
Yeah, right
What?
before they hit it big.
Yeah, he was devastated when they let him go.
Oh, I bet.
But eventually, his values shifted. He
Yeah.
found happiness in family and simple things. He redefined success on his own terms.
I love that.
And this all ties into Manson's critique of the whole self-esteem movement. He says true self-worth doesn't come from just trying to convince ourselves we're awesome at everything.
Yeah, where's the growth in that?
Right. He says it's about acknowledging our weaknesses. We grow by working on those less than perfect parts of ourselves.
So instead of pretending we're perfect, we should focus on, like, identifying and accepting our flaws.
And addressing them. And that's a good segue into relationships because Manson's a big proponent of setting healthy boundaries. And it starts with accepting those imperfections in ourselves.
So accepting our flaws can actually help us build better relationships. I mean, that makes sense, but it seems like something a lot of people struggle with, setting boundaries.
Yeah, it's definitely easier said than done. And that's where I think hearing about Manson's own experiences, it really helps. He's really open about his own struggles with this, especially in relationships. He talks about having this sense of entitlement, which he traces back to like his childhood, difficulty with processing emotions.
I mean, I have to say, it's refreshing to hear an author be so honest about their, vulnerabilities. It makes this whole thing feel a lot more relatable.
Absolutely. It's like he's right there with us, figuring it all out.
So how do we actually break free from those patterns, those kind of ingrained habits that get in the way of having healthy relationships?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, for Manson, it all comes down to understanding the power of no.
Okay, no is powerful. I'm with you so far.
Like really setting those boundaries, being clear about what we will and won't tolerate, and being willing to walk away from situations that don't serve us.
Easier said than done sometimes, though, right?
Yeah, it takes practice. But Manson even goes so far as to use the example of Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
He's saying our culture romanticizes this kind of all-consuming, self-destructive type of love.
Wow, okay. Romeo and Juliet as a cautionary tale about bad boundaries. That's a new one.
It really makes you think, right? Because healthy love, it shouldn't be about two people becoming totally dependent on each other.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down.
It's about supporting each other's growth, respecting each other as individuals, not expecting one person to meet all your needs.
Totally. So what do healthy boundaries actually look like? I mean, especially for those of us who might be stuck in those unhealthy patterns without even realizing it.
Oh, I think we've all been there. One common one is taking responsibility for our partner's emotions, feeling like it's our job to fix their problems.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely fallen into that trap before.
Right. Or the flip side, blaming our partner for our own unhappiness, making them responsible for our emotional well-being.
Oof, yeah. It's easy to slip into those patterns thinking you're coming from a good place.
Exactly. We often think we're being like loving and supportive, but it can create all sorts of problems down the line.
So if we're not supposed to do those things, what are we supposed to do?
Well, Manson's big on this idea of taking radical responsibility.
Okay, radical responsibility. What does
Right.
that actually mean?
It means owning our own emotions, our own actions, not blaming others for our circumstances.
Even if they're, like, partially to blame.
Even then, it's not about excusing bad behavior. It's about recognizing that we always have a choice in how we respond.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. So even when someone hurts us, we still have the power to decide how we react.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly freeing. And this actually leads to another one of Manson's, I guess you could call it paradoxical ideas. He talks about how commitment, something a lot of people see as limiting, can actually be incredibly freeing.
Okay, now that sounds like a contradiction. Commitment equals freedom.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, he ties it back to this idea of the paradox of choice.
Hmm.
We live in a world with, like, endless options, right?
Oh, tell me about it. I feel like I'm constantly bombarded with messages telling me I should be doing more, having more, being more.
Exactly. And Manson argues that this constant pressure to like find the next best thing, it can actually lead to a lot of anxiety, a lot of dissatisfaction. We're so busy exploring all the possibilities that we never really commit to anything fully.
Oh, I totally get that. It's like when you spend an hour scrolling through Netflix, overwhelmed by all the choices,
Yeah.
and you end up just rewatching something you've already seen a million times.
Yes. That's the perfect example. And so Manson's saying when we actually make a conscious choice to commit to something, a relationship, a career, or even just a place to live, and we close the door on other
Be
alternatives.
free yourselves.
Exactly. It allows us to invest more deeply in what truly matters.
And find more meaning in those choices.
Absolutely. And, Manson, he's not just talking the talk. He talks about how committing to writing, committing to love, to putting down roots, it opened up these unexpected opportunities for him. It brought him a deeper sense of fulfillment.
It's a good reminder that sometimes those limitations, those boundaries we set, they can actually help us grow in ways we never expected.
For sure. And all of this, it ties into what I think is Manson's most important message, embracing our mortality. He's saying facing the fact that our time is limited, it helps us figure out what really matters.
Yeah, I like happy one.
It is. It makes us really think about our values, how we want to live our lives. It challenges us to ask, like, what do we want to leave behind? How will we be remembered?
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're important ones to ask because at the end of the day, life isn't about achieving some perfect state of happiness or checking off every item on our to-do list.
Right.
It's about choosing how we want to experience this life, what we want to contribute, and who we want to be.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive into Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
It definitely gave us a lot to think about.
We've covered a lot of ground, from choosing our battles to embracing our imperfections. And, it all comes back to this idea of living more intentionally.
Choosing where we direct our energy, giving our fecks to the things that truly matter.
And for anyone listening, ask yourself,
Mm.
what are you giving a feck about?
Yeah.
And are those fecks worth giving? Until next time, keep diving deep